Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to Empowering Tomorrow's Leaders for a Sustainable Tomorrow. And we are absolutely certain that this will be a fantastic conversation between three incredible human beings. My name is Christiana Mertens, and I am the founder of DoGoodery. We are a social impact agency, and part of our work is to bring together some of the most brilliant minds to share their stories, like the three of these people. And we are so excited to be hosting them today. Thank you for joining us. I think you're in for a treat, and I want to make sure I give them plenty of time to get started. But before we jump in, just a couple of quick things. There will be a Q&A session after this with the three of them, but feel free to enter your questions in the chat function or the Q&A function before we go into the Q&A. And if you like a question that you see, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and those questions will start bubbling to the top. So, with no further ado, I am so excited to briefly introduce our panelists, and then they will do a much better job of introducing themselves. But I will start with the lovely and talented lead quality assurance engineer at Facebook, Andronica Klaas, the president and founder of the Chicago Eco House and Southside Blooms, Keelan Blackwell, and of course, optimist and best-selling author, Simon Sinek. So I'm going to invite our Andronica Klaas to get us started, and she will be moderating today's conversation. Andronica.
Thank you so much, Christiane. Hi, and welcome to everyone. As noted, I'm Andronica Klaas, and I am a QA engineering lead at Facebook, a role that I very much enjoy and grow a lot from. But what keeps my heart beating is sharing my experience and my story in hopes of inspiring others to build intentional youth development programming. My focus area is, however, STEM education. I also find passion in understanding the needs of first generation and minority students and working in partnership with corporations to build programming around the needs. So an example of a program that I recently worked on was a college program with a few of my college friends, sponsored by Google Ignite CS, where we went in and built a coding summer camp for high school and middle school students. And this was a free summer camp for all students. I am especially excited to be sitting on this panel today because I firsthand have experienced the benefits of being a part of an institution that takes girls from underprivileged backgrounds and gives them the necessary skills to succeed. This great institution is known as the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa. In fact, a few of my sisters are on the call, so I'm going to steal a quick second to say hi to them. Thank you for showing up and for streaming from both South Africa and the United States. Lastly, I am so excited and humbled to be sitting on a panel with such exceptional leaders. I am going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Keelan.
Excellent. Thanks, Andronica. Hi, my name is Keelan Blackwell. I'm president and founder of Chicago Eco House and Southside Blooms. I guess, my contribution to the world is, we work with at-risk young people here in Chicago, and we help create jobs through flower farms. So what that means is we'll take over vacant lots here in the city, we'll turn them into off-grid flower farms that have solar-powered irrigation, and then we will use those flowers and sell them through our in-house flower shop, Southside Blooms, as bouquets through our online delivery service. Last year, we had about 19 people working for us, and going to 2021, we're planning to rapidly expand as there's a lot of demand for our product, and there's a lot of young people who are looking for jobs. So I'm really excited to be on this panel, and as a practitioner and someone who has kids myself and work with young people all the time, I'm really looking forward to being able to engage this audience and maybe share a little wisdom. And with that, I'll hand to you, Simon.
Thank you, Andronica. Good to see you both. My name is Simon Sinek. I have a vision of a world that does not yet exist. I imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired, feel safe wherever they are, and end the day fulfilled by the work that they do. We live in a world in which I think we've over-indexed on rugged individualism and advancing oneself. We have an entire section in the bookshop called self-help, and we have no section in the bookshop called help others. And at the end of the day, it's service and doing right by others that not only advances the human race, but it's what leads to great joy and fulfillment in our own lives. So proud to be here with two change makers to see what we can do and share a little bit about what we've all learned.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction. So when I think of what has been shared already and just youth empowerment in general, a few things come to my mind: education, parenting, sustainability, professional development, personal development. In essence, just the theme of program development, I think of purpose and why. But before we dive into those areas, I want to start off with something that is very noticeable, that actually is one of my favorite things about this panel, is that we are a cross-generational panel. And so what I think, a nice opener in this conversation would be, even though I'm a millennial and I do have words of wisdom that I could pass down to my younger self, Simon and Keelan, I am setting this one out. If you could go back to your younger self, what lesson do you wish that you would have learned and appreciated at an earlier age that has helped you sustain yourself throughout your journey?
You go ahead, Simon.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll take it. So I'm 36. I feel like, saying my age is pertinent to this conversation. So I think I'm like smack dab in the middle between Andronica and Simon. So I think like if I were to talk to my younger self, I mean, there's definitely a lot of things I would say. But I think the thing that I wish I would have known back then, or at least I wish someone would have told me and really imparted on me, was that, it's okay to fail, because I've definitely spent a lot of time failing. And, I'm a risk taker by nature. But, like when I was in college and when, I was a young adult, taking risks and failing was kind of discouraged and really seen as like, everyone's encouraging you to take the safe path and get a job, you got to pay your bills, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what, like my first job, so I was in the Peace Corps for a couple years, and then I like got a quote unquote real job after the Peace Corps, and I struggled, like I was working as a community organizer at this nonprofit in Madison, Wisconsin. And like, I just couldn't handle like the office life. I couldn't handle like the politics of it. I just felt like I was a bird trapped in a cage, and, like a lot of people who were around me at that time, kind of, I felt like, I was the problem, right? And I felt like I had to try to conform to this world and this system that, didn't really give me life on the inside. And, fortunately, I was able to kind of break out of that. But, like I've started several businesses. I probably started like 7, 8 businesses in my life. Eco House is the first one that actually took off. But, in farming, there's this concept known as cover cropping, right? And cover cropping is essentially where you'll plant a crop like buckwheat or, clover, something like that, with the intention of it dying. So then it can provide life for your cash crop, right? In our case, it's flowers. And that's how I look at failure. Like, I really think that, a lot of times you go through experiences where it's preparation and it's like sowing a seed for like your cash crop later. And a lot of times you kind of discourage people like, hey, something that may have been your cover crop, we say like, hey, well, that didn't work out. You shouldn't do it. And you just should stop, right? And just uproot yourself. And I think that that's really the wrong mentality because your cash crop may be like 10, 15, 20 years down the line if you keep like, staying with it and sticking with it. So, definitely, I really wish I had a different paradigm about failure, when I was in my early 20s.
Very, very similar thought. The lesson that I came to learn, unfortunately, much later in life, is that I don't have to know all the answers, and I don't have to pretend that I do. Whether I was working for myself or whether I was working for someone, I felt like I had to prove my value. That I had to demonstrate that I was smart enough or good enough that they should trust me or give me more, which means that I always had to have an answer for every question. Not in a pompous or arrogant way, but in a willingness to contribute. But if I didn't know the answer, I would try and offer something because I felt that if I said I don't know, that it would either hurt me or set me back. Boy, was I wrong. Turns out when you don't know something and you try and do something, it's a lot harder. I eventually learned to say, I don't know when somebody asked me a question. And it turns out I was surrounded by people who wanted to help. I just didn't know they were there. They didn't help me because they thought I didn't need it. I'll tell you a funny story. And I took this challenge, which is not to tell a single lie for 48 hours. Believe it or not, it's way more difficult than you think, because sometimes we lie not to make ourselves look better. Sometimes we lie because we don't want to make somebody else feel bad. Like somebody gives you the ugliest sweater in the world as a gift and they say, what do you think? And you say, oh my God, I love it. Thank you. Right? Which is a total lie, but we did it so as not to hurt their feelings. So look at the time right now and challenge yourself. You can't tell a lie for 48 hours. So someone gives you an ugly sweater and say, what do you think? You have to say, oh my God, thank you for the gift. Right? It doesn't mean you have to be hurtful. You just can't tell a lie. And so I took this challenge, and by sheer coincidence, I had a meeting. It was like really exciting. I met with a head speechwriter for a senior member of Congress. And I had this meeting in the Capitol with these vaulted ceilings and frescoes. And I sat down, and the first question she asked me was, how much research have you done on the congressman? Now, any other day, I would have said a little, so as not to humiliate myself. But I literally, in my mind, went, shit, because I knew I couldn't tell a lie. So I looked at her and I said, none. And she said, okay, well, let me tell you then. She wasn't asking me to quiz me or test me. She was asking me to find out what my baseline of knowledge was. And by saying none, she told me everything. If I had said a little, she wouldn't have told me everything, and I would have continued the meeting at a complete disadvantage. Now, don't get me wrong, it could have completely backfired, but it could have been completely humiliated as well. That's part of the risk. But I have learned over the years that to admit that I don't know something, it means that I can work as a team with people rather than trying to figure everything out myself, which is really better.
I love that. What I'm hearing is leaning into the idea of failure not being fatal, right? So it not being an end all. So understanding that my mom says this a lot, and she says she doesn't believe in failure. She just believes in a redirection in that moment. And that's exactly what failure is to her, is that, what you thought was for you in this moment, that's not it. It's the universe trying to nudge you in a different direction. I recently had the opportunity to engage with some students from the Leadership Academy, and one of my favorite questions was around fear. I remember growing up, I used to hear this quote, if your dreams are not big enough, they don't scare you. And it sounded romantic until I was put in a position in which my dreams actually did scare me. And leaning in towards whatever the opportunity is that I had worked hard for or prayed for, presented just this unknown fear. And so my question is, I imagine that both of you, because you have found so much success, have felt moments of fear. How do you prevent yourself from being underwhelmed by the fear, so much so that you underperform rather?
You want to take that, Simon?
Sure. There's no avoiding fear.
Mm-hmm.
Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is acting when you're afraid. And one of the things I've learned is that courage is not a deep internal fortitude. Dig down deep and find the courage. That courage is actually an external thing. You have the courage to jump out of an airplane because of the parachute on your back. It's the parachute that gave you the courage. A world famous trapeze artist would never try a brand new death-defying act for the first time without a net. It's the net that gave them the courage. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of men and women in uniform who actually have risked their lives to save others, believing that they wouldn't come out of it. And I've had the opportunity to ask them, why did you do it? You've got a family, you've got kids. Why did you do it?
Mm-hmm.
And they all say something very similar, which is they would have done it for me, which is it's the courage that someone has your back. It's the belief that someone has your back that gives you the courage to act. And this is why I think personal relationships, nursing our relationships and sharing our insecurities and sharing our fears and sharing all of those feelings out loud with the people we love and trust really matters, because all it takes is one person to say, I got you. Or no, if this thing goes south, don't worry, I'll still be there with you. We'll get through this together. That's really all it requires for us to do very, very difficult things. But left to our own devices, if we just brood and do it ourselves, I'm not sure that anything great in the world would ever get done.
I have a couple thoughts on this. So fear is something that I get asked a lot. So, I guess I get a little vulnerable, a little transparent. I live on the south side of Chicago. I live in one of the more violent neighborhoods in America. And like on my block, for example, there's, we have shootings pretty regularly. And, I have kids, my kids are, all under 3. I have twins that are 3 and then a 1.5-year-old. And the thing is I'm here by choice, right? So I get this question a lot where it's Keelan, why did you decide to raise your family in such an environment? Mm-hmm. But it's more through this lens of you're being irresponsible, right? Because, most people, when they see danger, the, knee-jerk reactions to run from it, right? And I think for me, I think it's really just comes down to love. You know what I mean? I just really love my people. I love my neighborhood. I love, Black people. I love, Chicago. I love, the citizens of America. And, I just really felt because I grew up with a lot of privilege. I would say my background was definitely more of a Bill Cosby show type of upbringing. I didn't want for anything. I grew up in a nice nuclear home. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. One of the sayings in Madison is that it's 22 square miles surrounded by reality. So we kind of live in our own little bubble up there. You know what I mean? And I just really felt hey, I didn't do anything to deserve this, right? And particularly when I'm looking at the plight of other African Americans in our country and other young people, I just sort of felt if I were in, the shoes of the kids that we work with or my neighbors, I would wish and hope that someone who's in my position would take the time and just, come down and try to do something to help me out. And that really was the driver for me. So, even though, we've definitely experienced all sorts of crazy things, in the neighborhood and through our work, definitely had some close calls, where there's a drive-by and, you're just feet away from a shooting. And then, or even with kids. And if anybody who's a parent, I think anybody can really understand sort of the, that father or mother nature to really try to protect your kids. And, if something goes down the block, if there's a fight, a domestic incident, the cops are all down there and our kids are just playing in the front yard. I do think well, what if there's a stray bullet that were to hit one of my kids, those are all very real things. But I think the thing that helps me to overcome that is really just my love for the people. And that, I'm not special, right? I don't really feel my life is more valuable than, the drug dealer on the block, right? And I think that, that's something, if you can kind of get to that place, and it's not easy, don't get me wrong. I totally understand anybody, who says hey, I just can't do that. That's a little too extreme for me. But if you can get to that place, I do think it's very liberating because now you can start doing things that you didn't even think you could, think was humanly possible, right? Not even just doing cool things with our, social enterprise and our flowers and that kind of deal, but we're just really seeing the impact that you're having on people who otherwise would have, frankly, lost their life in the street, right? A lot of the young men that we work with, they don't have any other options. They don't have alternatives, right? So, their farm or our farms is really their salvation in a way. And I just think man, what if I would have quit, right? What if I never came here? What if I did succumb to that fear and to the danger? Look at all these human lives that wouldn't have been touched and that wouldn't have been impacted. And that's a very sobering thought in reality, for me and my wife. So yeah, I just really just feel it just comes down to love and what do you love more? Do you love yourself? Do you love your lifestyle? Or do you, when you say hey, I really care about alleviating the suffering in this world and, helping my fellow man, do you really mean that? You're going to put your life where your mouth is, right?
I love that. I love that so much. And I think you brought up an important point in that conversation, understanding your why. And we all know, Simon, this is your area of expertise. But I remember when I was 10 or 11 years old, we, very similar to you, Keenan, I came, well, you work in, an environment of people who are underprivileged backgrounds, but I grew up in an environment of underprivileged backgrounds. I remember when I was 10 or 11 years old, we lived in the backyard of a very kind family's property. And I remember this one day, we used to use a hot plate stove. So even though I'm a millennial, I actually have experienced a little bit of the old school. I am that millennial that's right on the cusp of being a tech baby, but also understanding what kind of felt like the Stone Ages to Gen Z. But I remember we had a hot plate stove rather, and at some point our stove died out, and my sister went to our landlord to borrow the stove. Initially, I thought she was just going to go ahead and use that stove to cook and, get whatever operational activities that we needed to get done for that day. But instead, my sister opened up the hot plate stove and she started cross-referencing against the two to figure out where ours had burnt in the wire. And eventually she figured it out, she fixed it, she plugged the stove back on, and we had a functional stove. And I remember that moment, I believe, was a catalyst for my love and my enthusiasm about STEM. To me, she had just shown me how practical skills can just alleviate either poverty or just bring so much relief, right? And so I think that a great conversation you brought up, Keelan, is about the why. And that to me is a constant moment of why. So when I am in need of understanding why am I in engineering, why do I care about advocating so much for children from minority backgrounds, I GPS myself back to that moment. If both of you could share a moment in which your why clicked in which, the light bulb just went off for you.
Go ahead, Keelan.
So my why is pretty straightforward. I'm a Christian, so like a lot of what I do is like faith motivated. When people say like, what would Jesus do? Like, I take that literally, like I do like try to interpret as many of, the situations I go through every day through the lens of like, what would Jesus do? Right. And which is part of the reason why like my lifestyle is the way it is today. Like we do have a open door policy in the sense of like, hey, anyone who comes to our door needing something, like you're not gonna be turned away. We're gonna like, try to, meet your needs to the best of our ability. We do try to like, or I try to like live my life in such a way to, be very transparent and vulnerable, and just like human, because, a lot of times, like, particularly when you're in a position of leadership, and I think Simon could probably speak to this too. By the way, I discovered the other day that Simon here is actually like a little celebrity. I didn't know that, like, yeah, I just thought he was like a regular dude when we were talking, but he mentioned something about Aloe Black, and I looked him up and I was like, man, this dude got like almost 2 million followers on Facebook. So anyway, it's really cool to be with you. I didn't know all that about you. I digress. But, but when you're in a position of leadership, I think like it's very easy for people to just think like, oh, you have it all together, right? That, you don't have any fears, you don't have any concerns, you don't have any weaknesses, right? And I do feel like there's a lot of pressure as a leader to try to keep it together because you have so many people who are counting on you, right? So for me, I just kind of put that pressure on God, and I'm like, look at like whenever I'm in a situation where I'm facing something that's, a little, too stressful for me, like, I'm on my knees, I'm praying, like that's a regular thing for me. So that's really my why is like, hey, at the end of the day, I really just, feel like God cares enough about all people, whether you're Christian or not, doesn't matter. But he just cares about all people, all creation, to the point where, he would use someone like me to be his hands and feet, so to speak, to do this kind of work in the communities, that are, on the margin. So that's really my why.
Beautiful.
You are so inspiring.
Right.
We should all learn to live our lives as you do, with courage and service. It's really wonderful. Though a why is basically an origin story. It's where we come from. It is a foundation, and we only have one why for the rest of our life. It's fully formed by the time we're in our sort of mid to late teens, and that's it. You are who you are, and the rest of our lives offer us an opportunity to make decisions that keep us in balance with our why or not. And if we are in balance, then we find inspiration and we're in flow, or however you want to put it, and there's a calm. And if we make decisions that put us out of balance from our why, it usually increases our stress and our sense of uncertainty in the world. And even though it's fully formed in our mid to late teens, some people go their whole lives without being able to understand it, or will probably discover it a little later on. I discovered mine during a period of crisis, where I had lost my passion for my own work, which was very embarrassing because superficially Everything seemed fine. I had a decent job. I made an okay living. We did good work. Like everything was fine. And yet I didn't want to wake up and do it again. And people gave me basically useless advice, like, do what you love, find your bliss. I'm like, thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. You know, I'm doing the same thing. I don't love it anymore. Like nothing's changed. And it was that crisis that set me on a path to find a different solution. But I didn't have the courage to find that solution because I was too busy lying, hiding, and faking and pretending that I was happier, more in control, and more successful than I actually felt. And it wasn't until a very dear friend of mine came to me and said, something's wrong. Something's different. Nobody else recognized it. And I came clean. I completely opened up to her. And that cathartic experience gave me the mental bandwidth to actually go find a solution and redirect that energy. And the solution I found was this thing called the why. It's based on the biology of human decision making. So it's not my opinion. And I discovered that my why is to inspire people to do the things that inspire them. So each of us can change our lives for the better. And I had one of the first decisions I had to make when that I needed to use my why as a filter was, okay, I discovered this little pattern and I'd been able to articulate it and write it down so that other people could understand what I had learned in a way that was really simple. What do I do with that? You know, I could trademark it and copyright it and sell it and probably make, tons of money from hoarding it. But I held up my why and I said, my why is to inspire people to do the things that inspire them. It was a very easy decision. I have no choice. I have to give it away. And so if you notice, there's no TM on the golden circle. It's not there. We give away the graphics. We want people to use it. I want people to use the words, because it's something that I think needs to be out there. And so it was that really helped me understand what service means. And I'm so drawn to people who commit themselves to a life of service. It's why I'm sitting here gushing, Keelan. It's just, and it's one of the reasons I find myself attracted to artists and folks in the military as well, because the entire value of the product that they make is for other people.
Right.
Which is very different than I think a lot of us are raised and taught. I think to live a life of service is, unfortunately, it's something in our society that's considered noble. And I think it's only considered noble because it's the exception rather than the rule.
Right.
But I think to live a life of service is what makes human beings their best selves. We are functionally and fundamentally social animals, and to serve is the path to fulfillment. So many of us are so obsessed with how do I get happy? How do I get successful? What are my goals? I want to make this amount of money. I want to achieve this by this age. I want to win an Oscar. I want to be on a cover of a magazine. And it's all very selfish. It puts the individual at the center, as opposed to having vision that has other people in it. Now, you can still achieve those things in service to the bigger thing. But the question is, what's the bigger thing that you're working towards, as opposed to just a picture of yourself standing on a podium? My life profoundly shifted from that day.
I love that.
Can I say something in response to Simon, or is that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. No. Let's go in.
Okay. All right. I don't want to break the
You
formula.
already told us that you're a rule breaker and a risk taker. So,
So feel free. No fairies created over here.
But yeah, I just wanted to kind of comment on what Simon said in terms of when your products, basically for other people. And when you're living a life of service, I think one of the things that, people kind of take for granted and underestimate is how much value you really do get in return. Once again, just kind of look at my experience here in Chicago and in Inglewood on the South Side here. I can't tell you how much my neighbors have enhanced my life. That's one of the things I totally underestimated, because I think when I started this journey back in 2013, 2014, I kind of came in thinking okay, well, I have something to give. Let me try to help. It's kind of more through this lens of I'm coming to solve a problem, right? And, like over time, as I really kind of ingratiated myself here and, frankly, like as, people accepted me, I really began to see that there's a whole nother world here that I wasn't, even privy to, that I'm, benefiting from immensely, like it's even like the little things, be able to have like neighbors, like Mr. Bowie across the street, like we were on vacation for Thanksgiving, and Mr. Bowie noticed that our car wasn't there for a couple of days. And, when we got back, he like, pulled me to the side and was like, hey, Keelan, I saw that your car wasn't there. I just want to let you know, I was like looking out for your house, because if I'm looking at your house, someone else is looking at your house. I want to make sure that someone's not going to break into it. Right. And, like most of the time, like if I was like living in like another neighborhood, most people are just so caught up in their own worlds that they're not even thinking about their neighbor. You know what I mean? And it just like when you're in that kind of environment, it forces you to change. I mean, you just become a lot different as a human being. You become a lot more aware and a lot more, you begin to value like just that human social fabric way more than you used to, right? So like, even like what Simon was talking about, for most people, it's like I got my bucket list of all the items that I want to achieve in life. And it is like through this very selfish lens. And I just think it's sad when, like to your average person, like you're not seeing this whole world out there that can, really bring the best out of you. And that's the thing is like my neighbors bring the best out of me. Like everything that we're doing here, it's not the Keelan Blackwell show. You know what I mean? Like, if I wasn't doing this in conjunction, in partnership and in a relationship, with my neighbors and with my community, this wouldn't exist. Like it wouldn't be special, and that's something that had to like, where I had to like really humble myself in that area. And I just like imagine like to your point, Simon, like if, this was a standard way of living, just imagine how different, a school could be, how different a block could be, a city, a country, right? And I do think like this should be more of a conventional lifestyle because like, I'm no different than anyone on this call. I'm just as human as you are. I'm just a regular dude, I just decided to take a different life path. And, I am hoping that, like even being on calls like this to sort of show that, hey, this isn't as scary as it looks. You know what I mean? That it's I think it's more fulfilling. I think it is, like using your word, Simon, more inspirational. And I just think like it's it's just a higher quality of life, not just for me, but for my kids. And that's a really cool thing is my kids are seeing this, like they're growing up in this environment. Yeah. So for them, this is normal, and I just can't imagine the way like, what they're going to do once they're older, because, having neighbors coming out the house and coming and sitting down for dinner, like that's normal to them, and I mean, I can't just tell you just how grateful and thankful I am to, just even be on this journey and to be in a place like Inglewood here in Chicago and to like have so many awesome neighbors, who just like surround you with love and who look out for you.
I think people they create a dichotomy, a false dichotomy, that they have to either choose service or individual success.
Right.
That those two are somehow mutually exclusive. And that service means living a life of suffering, right. Which is nonsense. Right. And then you hear these silly sort of projections like, I'm going to do well so that I can do good. So I'm going to put myself first, and then eventually I'll do good for others. A friend of mine who's a philanthropist, someone came to him for advice on philanthropy. And this was a former CEO of a very large company. And my friend asked him, so what are you most proud of in your philanthropy? And he said, well, we started this charity in the inner city where we help kids go on to college. And he said, that's amazing. How many kids have you helped? He said, 15. He says, is that the proudest thing you've done, in your life? He says, yeah, I'm really proud. And my friend said, so let me understand this. You're proud of 15 kids you helped go to college. Meanwhile, you destroyed the lives of the 60,000 people who worked for you. Like that's what happens when you do well so that you can do good. You put yourself at the center of the equation, and then eventually you'll try and even the scale so you can feel good before you die. And the reality is the opposite is true. Do good, and you can also do well.
Right.
But doing good should not be something that we save for our retirement. Doing good is something that we can do every day, and it's remarkably easy. I mean, what your neighbor did for you just by looking out his window was good. saying hello, asking somebody, how are you? And actually caring about the answer, saying please and thank you. You know, I mean, these are very, very little things that cost nothing, that make other people feel like you saw them, that they matter, that they exist. And that is all steps we take to doing good. And of course it can grow from there. It can scale from there.
I couldn't agree more. Showing up in kindness, it's a gift that keeps giving, right? So someone shows up in kindness for you, you are then inspired and encouraged to show up in kindness for somebody else. I love what you spoke about, Simon, in terms of doing well and reserving the good for later. For a long time, we've used this rescue narrative when it comes to youth development programs or any sort of programs, right, that are made to empower people who are in need. And as you have noted, this has created a self-fulfilling prophecy of creating a notion of us versus them, or something that, you know, gives you a chip on your shoulder to be proud of. I think that some of the challenges that I see in those programs is that they are created for the people and not with the people who are in need. And therefore it disempowers the people who are in need. How, outside of what you just said, if we're talking more in a practical sense, how do we shy away from this narrative of creating rescue narratives when we are building developmental programs to empower people?
Yeah, I got some thoughts on this.
Definitely.
My answer is very simple. You have to like be amongst the people, right? Like you have to become like the people who you want to serve. So once again, kind of being vulnerable again. When I first came to Chicago, God really challenged me to like sell everything I had. I came here, I didn't know anyone, don't have any family or friends here. And like the first few years were really tough. Like, God made me like the people, right? So I was like homeless for a while. Like I was living from room to room. I was hungry. I mean, I remember like going to a Walgreens and, all I had, was like $1 and I could afford some like corn nuts. And you know what, like those corn nuts were good. They were the best corn nuts I ever had because I was just so hungry. And, when you kind of grow up in an environment like I did where, you didn't want for anything, and to go from that to like, all of a sudden you're just thankful for having a meal, even if it's just a little snack in a bag, like it really just kind of changes your overall paradigm and your overall perspective, of yourself and other people. Right. But I really had to go through that humbling process of becoming like the people. Right. Because, you can't really, to your point, like, you can't really develop a very effective, successful program, if you don't really understand, if you haven't like walked, a mile in someone else's shoes and you're not like living like the folks, right? I mean, a lot of times, it's a profession, right? So, if someone looks at this as like, this is like my 9-to-5 job, I'm just clocking in, clocking out. I'm a social worker, I'm a teacher, and because there's some quote unquote do good, component attached to it, you kind of pat yourself on the back and you think like, hey, I'm doing a great job. Like there's nothing wrong. And just keep it moving. But, you're not there like after 5 o'clock, you're not there like, when, people are going to church or people are going to the grocery store, people don't see you at those times. Right. And that's really where life really, forms in a community. So, like from my perspective, like if once you're like really embedded in the community, you become like the people, you're willing to make those sacrifices. I will say investments, but, using, I guess, more of a conventional perspective, sacrifices, then like all the times when the really cool stuff begins to happen, because like there's a lot of talent here. There's a lot of assets are already here. And that's one of the biggest things that I think people don't understand is like, you don't really need to go, like in the case of, like my neighborhood, like they built a Whole Foods in this community thinking this was good. That was going to be a game changer. Like, you don't need to do that. You don't need to spend $20 million to bring in some big name brand grocery store or company and think that that's going to be a difference maker, right? Because like every community has its own rhythm. It has its own cultural context, right? And that's part of what makes our farms very unique, is that it's relevant within the cultural experience of this community, and that's why it's doing so well. That's why people want to work there, because it's something they can relate with. It's a lifestyle and a job style that, they help to develop. So it's literally like, like FUBU back in the day, for us, by us. Like that's how I look at, community development. Like it should be a for us, by us kind of approach.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're talking about developing an empathy muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, if you look at the state of our world today, I mean, that empathy is desperately lacking. And we could pick any number of conflicts and divisions we have in our nation, and there's just a lack of empathy. And I think one of the primary skills to learning empathy is learning to listen. And the problem is, where do we learn to listen? It is a skill. It is a learnable, practicable skill. We're not being taught it at home. We're not being taught it at school. We're not being taught it at work. So how do we learn to listen? And to listen with empathy, to try and understand where someone's coming from, how they feel, what their motivations are, not simply judging based on what they say initially or some behavior, but to truly get underneath and understand what's going on in their lives. To your point, Keelan, these things unfortunately are viewed as special or unique, and they really should be the norm, not the exceptions. That when somebody says something or does something that somebody else says, tell me more, or go on, as opposed to just reacting and offering our opinions. Alas.
I love the fact that you spoke about parenting. I believe that development programs start at home, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, right? We all know that parents are our children's first and most important teachers. I find value in the fact that a lot of work is being done externally to help students grow into self-aware and mindful and responsible and, children who are led by service leadership. But I do think that there's value in figuring out how to build a system of that within the immediate environment itself. My mom's favorite book is actually one of her favorite books is The Conscious Parent, around the idea of parenting. So knowing what you know and being in places in which you actually do develop systems, whether it's, systems to help empower people to fall in love with what they want to do, or whether it's, building sustainable projects within immediate communities. What lessons would you bring into a conversation with parents around creating the system at home and getting it developed from a young age so that we do have a generation that is very self-aware and that doesn't come from a place of selfishness, but more so of I am blessed and how do I bless others?
You have kids, Simon?
No, I don't. I have a niece and nephew that I spoil.
Oh.
But I undo all the good parenting by my sister and brother-in-law.
And then give them back to the parents.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess that puts me on the spotlight. So, like I said, I'm a parent. I have kids. I would say that, parenting is such a tricky thing because it's so personal. I literally feel like it's the most personal thing someone can do. A lot of people don't like it when you try to tell them how to handle their household. And I can totally respect that, right? I don't like it when someone who doesn't know much about my household tells me about how I'm raising my kids, right? But I think for me, I just look at it as, kids are going to do what you do, right? When I think about my most formative experiences when I was a kid, my dad was really big into community service, right? He was the one who really modeled that lifestyle for me as a kid, as a young, when I was a child. He said a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, I really found myself being drawn, to what he would do. And I just remember him going to community meetings in Madison, he was very active in the school and on the parent teachers organization. And that really was very shaping for me. And so when I look at my kids, for me, it's really more about how can I cut out the fat so I don't put myself in a position where, I'm always saying hey, you should do this, you should do that, blah, 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 blah. But it's more hey, do what you see me do, right? Do what you see what your mom's doing. This is how you treat people. You see the way, we're involved in the school. You see the way we treat our neighbors, we like to tell our kids hey, when they see, there's a lot of homeless people, in our neighborhood who kind of walk, back and forth. And we say and our kids will be hey, who's that? And I'm hey, that's our neighbor. That's a friend, and just kind of, trying to teach them and show them that, hey, these are, we're all human beings, right? So, you don't necessarily judge people based on their socioeconomic status or their condition. And that's a big reason, why we are very happy with, where we live, because we want our kids to not be afraid of poor people. We don't want our kids to be afraid of sort of this otherness. That's another topic, by the way, because I feel like, in circles like this, we like to talk about diversity, but, really it's kind of become this echo chamber of like a lot of like-minded people who just have like different skin colors, you know what I mean? But, ultimately, like everyone's kind of like around the same socioeconomic status, same education level, et cetera, et cetera. And, we really want our kids to be able to, break out of that and to like have experiences, like real lived experiences, with all kinds of people. So, yeah, I mean, my advice would be just like, it all starts with you first in terms of your actions, because you're not gonna be able to teach anything that you're not able to do yourself first, right? So that's been our philosophy of parenting.
Agreed. What they see is what they become. You addressed education in your conversation. With student debt at a high, coupled with the world in which we live in, where we are seeing people increasingly attain whatever level it is or per their definition of success without a formal education. Personally, I am an advocate for formal education and your traditional education. And for me, it's because I look back at my career in college and I realize how a lot of it was teaching me how to learn and how I receive information, how I retain information. It was teaching me skills that I needed to work on, or skills that I had to lean more into. My question around this education conversation is, do you share any similar feelings or views around the value of education in this day and age? Also mindful of the fact that we live in a world in which everything is on the internet. So what you could traditionally get through an institution, you can actually go and get for free off the internet and still get the same level of knowledge.
I think knowledge and education are not necessarily the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a fan of sort of binary assessments. College is bad. Mm-hmm. You don't need it. College. Everyone should go to. Well, I think it depends. There are some people who are extremely entrepreneurial, who are extremely disciplined to get the things done they need to get done, and may have had a life experience that taught them some things that have given them a leg up at a younger age. They're the ones saying, I didn't need college, so you don't need college. That's not entirely true. To your point, Andronica, I think college provides more than simply knowledge. I mean, am I using the knowledge from most of the classes that I took in college? Absolutely not. Completely useless. But what else did I get in college? To your point, I learned how to learn. I learned how to pose an argument to question an authority figure who has more education than me in a constructive way. I learned how to debate. I learned how to disagree constructively. I learned how to fend for myself a little bit. Grew up in a nice home, nuclear family, and this was my first experimentation with independence. When I didn't have somebody to make me get out of bed in the morning, that would I actually show up to class if I was fully responsible for myself? And I think it's like a halfway house between sort of nurture and adulting. And there's much more to college. And I think one of the big ones is interpersonal, where you're learning how to interact with other people who don't look like you, didn't come from your neighborhood, didn't go to your school, have a completely different experience. And I think these are all fantastic opportunities, and you can screw up a lot in college because it's like I said, it's practice. It's a halfway house. Of course, I think something needs to be done for the amount of money that it costs, and to put yourself in debt. I think one of the big complaints against my argument was like, why should I put myself in such debt for life experience? Mm-hmm. I concur. Something definitely needs to be done for that. But I don't think it's so binary, college good, college bad. I think it depends, and I think there's more value to college than some of the trends that people are espousing lately. I think there's a lot of value. I was throwing my 2 cents. I know we're getting like the 2-minute warning here. I like to tell people, I was taught in Wisconsin, but I was educated in Chicago. And what I mean by that is I definitely accumulated a lot of knowledge and information. I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison. I got a master's at the University of Denver. But it really wasn't until I was in these streets that I really learned how to apply, things in the real world and make things really happen.
So, to like what Simon's saying, I totally agree. Like, like education isn't binary, and I do think it's contextual. And I think ultimately it comes down to like whatever your specific interests, gifting, and circumstances are. Like, college doesn't make sense for everybody. Trade schools doesn't make sense for everybody. Some people can, like, to your point, Andronica, you can learn something on YouTube and, just kind of become self-taught at something and build a really cool business, or, something else, and, become a YouTuber and, make a great living. So yeah, like, I think ultimately, like, whatever path you decide, at some point you're going to probably have to, come to this great reckoning of how am I going to be effective in the real world, And for me, like, that was Chicago. Like, that's when I basically was like, okay, I have all this knowledge, all this information, but I didn't really figure out how to put it together until I was within this very specific environment that really brought it out of me and really forced it out of me,
Well, I wish we could keep going, but as all three of us have noted, we are at our 2-minute call out. So thank you for this conversation. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. Couldn't have spent my Wednesday morning any better than this. I'm going to go back and hand it back to Christiane.
That was amazing. There's like a round of applause everywhere. We're getting text messages, we're getting emails. I wish you could see everybody clapping around the room in the virtual room. Thank you three so much. And for those of you watching, just know Andronica kind of got put on the spot to be our panelist leader. And Andronica, as always, you nailed it. Keelan, you're amazing. Simon, you're amazing. And we have so many questions. So a couple of quick things, everybody. We are going to go until 11:30 Pacific. We will be losing Simon a little bit earlier, but Andronica and Keelan will be staying on through the duration of the Q&A. So we are actually going to start with the question from someone who is 13 years old. And her name is Ashriya. And she says, I am 13 years old. How do I serve and where do I begin? Who would like to take that?
It starts with your friends. Service doesn't have to be some big thing. It starts with your friends. Service and leadership are very, very similar things. And the way I like to define leadership is it's a responsibility to see those around us rise. Do your friends feel that someone has their back? Do your friends feel seen? Do your friends feel heard? Do your friends feel understood? Are you practicing the skill of empathy and listening? Do you know how to have an effective confrontation when you have a disagreement with a friend? And all of these skills make your friends feel valued and valuable in your life, which builds their own self-confidence and helps them go do bigger things. So as much as I also love service, when you serve your community and go do those things, it really does start at home. It starts with your friends and it starts with your family. It's a great place to practice because you get immediate feedback.
I think.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Keelan.
To build off what Simon's saying, I know this isn't popular as a 13-year-old, but I would say it starts with your parents first, because it's easy to, as we say in our community, code switch, right? It's easy to kind of, put on, a different facade around friends or community members or your teachers, but with your parents and your siblings, you got to keep it real. Like, that's the real you, right? And they know who you are. So, if you really are trying to shape your heart to really have that heart of service, it really does begin with starting with your parents, start with your siblings. Are you looking for opportunities to, maybe bless them with breakfast in bed? Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to wash your brother's?
Is this a subtle hint to your kids when they grow up, Keelan?
Right. Is my mom on this?
You know what? I may record this and share this with them in 10 years, But yes, it really starts with those small things with the people, who you're with every day. And I know your parents get on your nerves, so that's why it's a real test of who you really are. If you can serve your parents, particularly when they have to discipline you, or your, siblings, or they're getting on your nerves, then you can serve anybody, let me tell you.
I think also in context of, when we look at education and what's going on in our schooling systems, whether it's bullying, or kids feeling ostracized, there's an immediate opportunity in there too, standing up for the person who is the little man, standing up for the person who is excluded in those spaces, right? So being mindful of that and being inclusive, I without a doubt agree. It does start in your immediate spaces and your immediate circles. And there's always opportunity. It's just your willingness to open your eyes to it and to act out on it.
Amazing. Thank you. And for everybody, just so you know, we are recording this and there will be a chance to catch some of the highlights afterwards in case you want to share this far and wide. This question comes from a friend of DoGoodery. She runs a nonprofit in New York called New York Sunworks, and her name is Manuela. And she would like to know, as not-for-profit leaders, sometimes we get overwhelmed and lose our why. What has been your strategy to refine yours?
Well, first of all, let me pull out my soapbox for a minute here. Please stop calling yourself not-for-profit, right? That is a tax delineation, right? And no one wants to be defined by what you're not. First, that's number one. Number two, of course you're profitable. You just don't define profit in terms of dollars and cents. If you set up an organization to rescue kittens out of trees, you better be profitable because it means you're rescuing more kittens out of trees than not. So just redefine how you define profit. Stop calling yourselves not-for-profit and start calling yourselves for-impact organizations. That's the first way to get your back on track. Because what it does is it puts your why front and center and not money. Money is just an object. It's fuel. Money is fuel. You need fuel to make the car go, but that's not why the car exists. You're a for-impact organization. The question is what impact are you trying to make in the world? And that's how you can help keep your why front and center, which is you're constantly reminding yourself of it. It's written on the walls. I think one of the big mistakes that a lot of for-impact organizations make is they actually don't know how to define their cause. We want to change the world. Well, I don't know what that looks like. You know, great vision is something that you can imagine in your mind's eye. And the great leaders in our world, whether they're business leaders, political leaders, or civil leaders, are able to articulate vision in terms that we can imagine ourselves in that world. I have a dream that one day little black children will hold hands on the playground with little white children. Like you can see that in your mind's eye. Paint a picture for us and then set yourself on course towards that. I think the other thing is for-impact organizations need to stop competing against each other. It drives me nuts. Two organizations that are trying to help find the cure for cancer competing against each other. You've got to be nuts. One has strength, the other one has weaknesses. This one has strengths that the other one has weaknesses. Why not combine forces? You're more likely to find the cure for cancer if you actually work together as opposed to in competition with each other. But the whole idea is keep the why front and center in crystal clear terms that we can imagine and call yourself a for-impact organization. It'll go a long way.
And on that, you said that better than I could, Simon. 2 snaps in a pop, my man.
Rob.
Amazing. Okay, our next question comes from Samantha, who is going to be graduating this year from college. And her question is, what advice do you have for empowering youth during and after the pandemic?
Oh, you cute.
Yeah, so this is interesting because, we kind of lived through this ourselves, with, our organization. So, before the pandemic, I would say the thing that we really noticed with our youth and our young adults, is that there was I'll say a little bit of a malaise, you know what I mean? A lot of our kids just kind of it's easy to kind of get, we're going through the motions, and you just begin to take today for granted, right? Because you just assume today's gonna be like every day. And then the pandemic hits and immediately, you're just totally thrown for a loop, right? So I think it was a great opportunity and great wake up call in a lot of ways that, tomorrow's never promised, tomorrow's never guaranteed. And that, it was a great lesson in terms of how to pivot, how to adapt. So, one of the things that we had to do within our work is we had to pivot from, say focusing on events, because that's really, our primary model to really sustain, our job development was focusing on these, events with companies and, community organizations and that kind of deal. And we had to pivot to online delivery model because that's the only thing that was allowed was doing deliveries, right? And that turned out to be one of the best things we could have ever done. Our organization, and our, our Southside Blooms, our, our business, our social enterprise, it grew tenfold. So, it turns out that there's like a ton of demand for delivering bouquets. And I would have never guessed that. And people love the convenience of it. Of course, they love the mission. But to really have our youth like walk through that process where they sort of see, okay, you have this big, event that, is not just life changing for you as an individual, but for your entire community. And then to like go through this process of like pivoting, because, once again, I mean, for our kids, this is their thing. So they're like worried, am I not gonna have a job? Am I gonna be on the street? Like, what's gonna go on, Keelan? Like everyone's looking at me, right? So, to really see, us go through that process of first kind of being in that crisis and then coming out 10 times stronger than we were before, it's better than any lesson you could teach in a classroom, right? And our kids, or, our young adults, because they're older, they're not children, the ones who work for us. So like these young adults, like you can just see that they have a whole nother sense of self-confidence, right? Because they're a part of that process, coming out of it, it's almost like this, well, we can do anything. If we could like take on the pandemic and win, then like, what else could stop us, right? So we started with just like these flower bouquets, but now we brought in to like selling Christmas wreaths, we're doing ceramics, of course we got like our honey business that we're mixing in there. But like we're really beginning to like diversify our product line. And it's just because like, coming out of this crisis situation, we all sort of have this mindset that, anything's possible, right? Like there's no limits to what we can do. So yeah, it's very exciting, to see our youth really grow and, mature through that experience. And I have no idea like the way it's going to affect them as leaders. But yeah, like I just really think that a lot of times, when you're in a position of leadership, it's really how you navigate those crises. Because once again, it kind of goes back down to, back to what I say with parenting, like you're modeling the behavior, right? They're following your example. So if I were to like shrink in fear and like be like, oh my God, like what we're going to do, like then they're going to be thinking, well, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to panic, right? But when they see like, hey, let's all take a deep breath. Let's try to see where there's some hidden opportunities here. Let's try to experiment a little bit. And, if we find something that works and like, hey, let's go full gusto for it. And it works, like, dude, now they've seen, behavior that when the next crisis comes, they can do for themselves. So yeah, like the pandemic was like a big boon for us here at Eco House and for our young adults.
Keelan. Okay, the next question comes from Dennis, and it is, if one has a personal mission that is seemingly too big in scale, too difficult to do, or simply unreasonable, how does one find motivation to do it?
I think for me, it's starting small, right? I think the one thing that I enjoy about being an engineer is learning how to break things down to a deliverable. And it's a challenge for me because I'm the person who will write an entire summary that's a page full, even though an executive summary is supposed to be only one paragraph or a few lines. But I think understanding what the deliverables are down to the T and being able to articulate those, and maybe just starting off with one deliverable, right? What is it that you're trying to achieve with whatever purpose project it is that you're building, and then building around that. So for me, it would be starting small, try to break it down to the most important impact project to you. So what is that deliverable that you're trying to achieve out of that project? Simon, Keelan?
I mean, variations on a theme. I think the two have to work in concert. The vision should be unrealizable. That's what makes it visionary. And when our founding fathers said all men are created equal, like that is an ideal state of the world, and we will never get there, but we will die trying. That's sort of the point. And all of the milestones, the abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, civil rights, gay rights, like all imperfect and ongoing in their own rights, are steps, the cumbersome steps we're taking towards that vision. And each of those had little steps to be taken, to Andronika's point. So I think you need to have that idealized state of the future that you will never get to. It is a life's pursuit. But then then the question is, what's the cheapest, simplest thing you can do with the highest probability of success? What's the first deliverable? that's one step you can take in the right direction. So I think vision is a vector. Vision provides course. It provides direction of where to go, what direction to go, and then what's the first step that you can take that takes you one step closer. And as you start piling up those steps, it's what gives your life and your work meaning, because you feel like you're moving closer to an idealized state.
Yeah, and just kind of add to what everyone else is saying. I think like in the Bible it says, "Don't despise the day of small beginnings," right? And so kind of like what both Andronica and Simon are kind of talking about, like, yes, you want to dream big. You need to have a big vision, right? But everything starts very, very small. And I think like our mission, our vision is to really transform the inner city, not just in Chicago, but like every inner city here in America, and eventually moving on to the slums of the world, through bottom-up economic development, through urban agriculture and sort of these like sustainable social enterprises, which is like this gigantic vision, right? But, we got started with just like one vacant lot, you know what I mean? Working in like one raised bed. Like that's how we got started. It was like very tiny, it was very small, but, it was a safe place to make mistakes. And that's the thing is like, when you're trying to pursue something really big, you don't know how you're gonna get there. I mean, that's like the point. It's kind of what Simon's saying, like, no one's ever done it. Like, that's the reason why it's like this compelling vision. But, at the same time, like, you don't want to start off so big that, when you make these mistakes, now you have to suffer these very painful and crippling lessons, which I've seen many people do, by the way. We started having a bootstrap, and at the very beginning, like, it did feel more like a curse because, like, I've had friends who start organizations and they had like, some rich uncle who like, dropped $250,000 and they start big, but those friends are no longer in the game. You know what I mean? Because like when they were making the same mistakes that we were making, it cost them because people don't like it. I mean, you could imagine if if you were to give someone $250,000 and you screw that up, like there's going to be blood that's going to be spilled, right? But if I mess up with my $25 packets of seeds, like it's okay. It's not a big deal. So I can like get that lesson and adapt and be nimble and then be like, okay, well, that didn't work and now adjust, right? So yes, definitely like do not underestimate starting small and like making small mistakes, but it's really that wisdom, that knowledge that you're accumulating as you're making those mistakes. So then when you're ready to go big, you know what you're doing.
Amazing. Simon, do you have time for one more question for you specifically? Amazing. Okay, so this is from our friend Maggie at the San Diego Zoo. And her question is, I love your forward in the infinite game about the choice between the paths to victory and fulfillment. What advice would you give to young people on choosing the path to fulfillment? I love what you said about service to others. And what else would you encourage to incorporate their work?
I'm going to be variations on a theme here. I think our nation has over-indexed on a rugged individualism and individual success. I mean, look at in most corporate environments, the primary means by which we incentivize behavior is by giving people an individual reward for an arbitrary number that they hit on an arbitrary date. That doesn't necessarily promote cooperation. It promotes competitiveness, sometimes against each other. And there's nothing wrong with individual achievement, but I think it's unbalanced. And I think we need to do more to encourage things like doing the right thing. So, for example, considering how we treat others on the way to getting our goals. I had an opportunity to work with the Navy SEALs, and within the Navy SEALs, there's an elite group within the Navy SEALs. And I asked, who gets into the elite group? Like, how do you choose? And the director of training drew a chart for me, performance versus trust. Performance is defined as how good are you at your job. This is what the traditional metrics measure, right? I did my work and look what I achieved. Look what grade I got. Then you have trust. What kind of person are you? What's your character? And what they learned in the Navy SEALs, which is a very high performing organization, is of course, everybody wants the high performer of high trust, of course. Of course, nobody wants the low performer of low trust, of course. What they learned is that the high performer of low trust is a toxic team member. And they would rather have a medium performer of high trust, sometimes even a low performer of high trust, it's a relative scale, over the high performer of low trust. And the problem is, in almost every metric that we have in our society to how to measure people, we only measure performance. We don't measure their character, what kind of person they are. And then those people get promoted and eventually you have toxic leaders. And I think it's not one or, it's both. I think we need to do a better job. Peer review, for example, is something that almost doesn't exist in companies. Asking your boss what they think of you is going to be based on, did they hit the targets I gave them? Asking other people, would you like to be more like them, or who in the organization best represents the values that we stand for, means you encourage people to live by those values. And the amazing thing is we as social animals are more profoundly influenced by what our peer group thinks of us than what our boss thinks of us. In other words, you're proud when your boss gives you a compliment, but when your entire community says we want to be more like you, it'll bring you to tears. It's that powerful. People are angry when somebody else gets a promotion, but not me. When somebody else gets recognized by the group, it makes us proud and we want to be more like them. It actually makes us work harder to be better people. So I think we need to, there's many things inside in organizations we need to do, but I think one of the things we need to recognize is how people achieve their results, not that they achieve their results.
Yeah, to add to that, so like in farming, one thing I love about farming is like, there's a lot of embedded lessons in nature, right? So, it's like what Simon's saying, like, we really like try to focus on competition. But if you really look at the way nature works, your most successful species are actually your most collaborative ones, right? And like one of the examples I like to give is like the humble chicken, right? Because, the humble chicken has been around since like the T-Rex age, and, the thing is like, why have they been so successful? And it's because there's so many other species whose, life depends on them, right? If, like chickens, like they, they'll like eat, they'll whatchamacallit, like, they'll kind of like scavenge and, like mix things up and, scratch the ground. So like, they're kind of like, Mother Nature's way of like tilling the soil, which is great for like plants and that kind of thing, and turning over the soil. Obviously, they are very easy food source for like, say, human beings with like both like primarily with their eggs. I mean, eggs are like a staple for a lot of people's breakfasts, which is one of the reasons why human beings have totally embraced them, even like to their poop, right? Which is like a great and rich fertilizer, so there's like all these different, factors that they'll play, that they contribute to, and they're very collaborative with other species, which is why they've really prospered. So if you were to take that lesson from like the chicken and you apply it to your career or your company, your organization, you really should be trying to set yourself up to be very collaborative in the sense that, if you were to die or if like your organization were to go under, there'll be a lot of other people who will suffer because of that, right? And that's like one of the, ethos we try to apply here with our work is we really want to try to like have as many different entities and organisms within our, socioeconomic ecosystem here in Inglewood and Chicago be dependent on us, right? Because like that's going to increase our vitality because they're like, hey, we need egos to be successful because that's making me successful, right? And I think like when you sort of move from that phrase of, rugged individualism, and you start looking at things more collaboratively and communal and from a communal lens, and then you begin to see that, hey, my success is tied to all these other people. You totally approach your career differently and you end up finding that you have success a lot faster, right? Because people who need your success, like they're going to open up doors for you. And that's what we've experienced, right? Just like I open up the coop for my chickens every morning, right? I'm feeding them, I'm watering them because they give me them good eggs every morning. You know what I'm saying? So like I have a vested interest in keeping them alive. And that's the way I feel like, we should try to approach life.
Everyone, I wish I could stay. I'm having too much fun. I've learned a lot. I'm leaving unbelievably inspired. Thank you for the invitation to join. Andronica and Keelan, so great meeting you. I wish you all good fortune and Godspeed. Thank you very, very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Appreciate you, Simon. Take care, man.
Okay. Our next question, Keelan, the chicken analogy is the first time I've ever heard that. I can say with confidence, thank you, and I will repurpose that for another conversation. The next question, we're going to direct this to you, Andronica, is from Brian, and he asks, how was an unlikely relationship fed into your approach of what great leadership really means? And what value did that unlikeliness contribute?
Wow. That is a really good question. I think for me, when I hear that question, I think of a relationship that I had with one of my managers. I don't know if anyone is familiar with corporate culture, but sometimes it is a bit of a challenge as a millennial, figuring out how to, again, respectfully and with mindfulness, bring insight to the table in a way that is respected. Because there is this notion that sometimes in order for one to be knowledgeable, you have to have this many years of experience. And so that was the relationship that taught me a lot, because it's great to be in situations in which you are in favorable relationships, right? Relationships that just work and that are organic and that you can get value from and the other person gets value from. But even though in that moment I didn't appreciate that relationship, I now look back to it. And it honestly, the value that it had brought to me, and it still continues to bring to me, is trying to understand people and trying to understand where they come from. And so I think that because I walked into that moment with a bit of an ego, and part of it is because you experience it so much as a young person in your career, especially if you are one of the youngest or one of the only, that you build a defense against it. And so the valuable lesson rather was learning to put my defense down and trying to understand why people behave the way that they do. And later on, I realized that it wasn't even personal behavior. She did it to everybody else. But because I had a thorn about it and, I had experienced it so much, or I felt as though I didn't belong because I was the youngest, I took it more to heart than everybody else would. And so it's, again, learning to put my guard down, understanding, and then also figuring out how do I communicate impact, even in a space in which there isn't a favorable relationship.
I think for me, I learned a lot from my enemies. I have enemies, just being honest. So, I think one example is like one of our farms is near Hyde Park in this neighborhood called Woodlawn. And it's like, it's gentrifying. Our farm was like right across the street from this neighbor who was this, Caucasian gentleman. And, the only white guy on the block in this Black community, but was very vocal about the way we were farming. He didn't like the crops we were growing. He didn't think, we mowed often enough. He complained to the aldermen all the time. So he's just really a thorn in my side, right? And a thorn in the organization's side. It literally got to a point where, kind of doing like this passive aggressive stuff where he'll take trash from like, his side of the street and then dump it on our farm, right? Like that kind of stuff, right? And, as you could imagine, that would kind of tick you off, right? But the thing is like, in that particular instance, like looking back on it, is really a lesson in restraint. You know what I mean? Because the thing is there's days where I was like, you know what, we could totally just crush this guy like a bug. Because like when you're in a position like we are, we have media contacts, we have community contacts, like, especially like in this day of like Black Lives Matter, it wouldn't have taken much to like ruin that guy's life. You know what I mean? But we didn't want to do that. That wouldn't have been the right thing to do. Like that wouldn't have been, like love, right? And some people may have said, well, hey, the guy had to come into him. He's harassing you. He's kind of coming to his Black community, acting like he owns the place. But even then, like, you have to, be able to like, restrain your actions. Because, in my mind, it's like, hey, is that, like this idea of proportionality, right? Is, him basically being a nuisance, because he really wasn't destroying our farm. He's just being a nuisance, right? So does that really justify us ruining potentially his livelihood? And, like the answer is no. And I think like, particularly in this day and age where people are very quick to take some incident and upload it on Facebook and YouTube and then try to like, like basically make a mockery and ruin someone's life. I think like, for me going through that instance with him, it really just sort of taught me that, hey, you know what, you have to be restrained as a leader. You have to be restrained in your actions. Even when you feel justified, doesn't mean it's the right thing to do or it's the most constructive thing to do. And thankfully, he moved. A lot of times you have those kind of situations. There's a bunch of other stuff that's going on. I mean, I just think he wasn't a happy guy. And, we were just kind of like the most convenient target for him to take it out on. Because, like within a year, he packed up and left the block. And, no problems for me anymore. So, like instead of making it and escalating it and turn to a bigger situation, we really, because of restraint, was able to, sort of like let it play out and really run its course. And it ended up, sort of taking care of itself without us having to take some dramatic action.
Keelan, I'm really glad you stuck with your Keelan ways and didn't do the thing that I might have done had I been. I'm just saying. Okay. So we're coming down to our last 10 minutes, but I'm telling you, we have so many questions, but this one is actually from Madinaya. And Veronica wants you to know that she is proudly South African, living in New York City, and was the chairperson of an NGO in Cape Town called the Thope Foundation, which was operating STEM after-school programs for girls. Her question is, what's the best advice you can share to girls from disadvantaged backgrounds interested in STEM, but don't necessarily have the financial or family support?
I think that I am answering that question from a place of privilege because, again, as noted, I did attend the Leadership Academy for Girls. And I started at the academy when I was 13 years old. And so I don't have much recollection of how I felt prior to that, but I do remember that a part of what kept me going once my sister figured out how to fix the stove was that curiosity and trying to figure out how do I nurture that curiosity. And so the advice that I would give is resources aren't necessarily always money. Resources can also be opportunity to fix something within your household or, to fix something that is broken in your neighbor's, house or whatever else. And so I think that it's learning how to identify opportunities for sharpening your skills in your immediate space. In our household, it ended up being us fixing the light. So when the light was broken the next time, as opposed to having my sister figure it out, she would let me try to figure it out, obviously very cautiously so. But it's things like that where there are resources and they may not look like finances, but there's definitely opportunity in poverty. I think that's one of the things that I love about poverty, and Keelan and I were talking about it, is that there's amplitude opportunity for creating solution in that space. And that's really just what innovation is, right? It's being able to sit here and say, oh, this is what the issue is. How do I then go ahead and create a solution around that? So I would urge an encouragement from even their families around innovation and creating safe opportunities for them to nurture that curiosity and the innovation that they come up with.
I'm not a girl, so I defer to Andronica.
Thank you, Andronica. Keelan, I'm going to this question directed at you. With the age of computers, what advice do you have for grandparents, 50 plus, to get children/grandchildren more involved in community serving others?
Could you repeat the question?
That's a good one.
With the age of computers, what advice do you have for grandparents to get children/your grandchildren more involved in community to serve others?
Got you. It's funny. The moment you said grandparents, I immediately went to my grandpa, who's almost 80. He grew up in Arkansas. He's kind of like your classic Southern Black man. And he could not use email or a computer to save his life. But, he understands the value of a lot of the old school, being involved in your community, loving your neighbor. So it's interesting because I kind of feel like I exist at this nexus, right? Because I am very old school in the way I approach things. If you guys haven't picked that up, but at the same time, I live in this new age world where, things are very tech and, in my mind, distant, because it's social media, email, texting, the whole 9 yards. And, I think at least in, my experience, trying to really merge that gap, can be a challenge with these younger kids that we're working with. But I think it's really just trying to reframe it, right? Because I think a lot of times older people come with the wagging finger, which, by the way, don't do that. Immediately you're going to turn people off, especially young people, right? But you come in wagging saying, hey, don't you know, you should be picking up trash after yourself. Back in my day, we did X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of things, you know what I mean? So I think I had to learn how to kind of reframe it. And this kind of once again, the idea of put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? Because this is the thing, we all were young. I mean, we like to sort of segment oh, well, this is generation X, this is generation Y, generation Z. But, if you really look at it from the larger sweep of just human history, there's just a lot of commonalities of just being young, right? Like I did stupid stuff when I was young. I didn't necessarily see the wisdom of, being involved in community and doing things a certain way if someone didn't take the time to teach me and like really, have to endure my immaturity. Right. So I think I just really learned how to be like really patient. So, like a lot of our kids, like they're always on their cell phones. It can be very hard to get them to focus. But instead of coming in with like the wagging finger, like you try to like engage them and, say like, hey, it's about redirecting, right? It's like, hey, like this really isn't the appropriate time. Let me kind of explain to you, how you're coming across, right? Because like if I'm talking, I'm trying to lead a lesson here on planting sunflowers and you're on your phone, I'm not saying like this is your intention, but the way it comes across is I don't care, right? And a lot of times like light people just don't know, you know what I mean? So like you really just have to kind of come at it as, they're really committing an innocent error. Like they just don't know. So when you kind of, you're soft about it, you just kind of explain to them, hey, this is like, why we do things a certain way, and then it's like, oh, okay, sorry, I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I'm sorry, Keelan. And then, like you kind of earn a little more trust, right? But if you kind of come in, hot and heavy, trying to bury a kid, then yeah, like it's not going to go well. And like, unfortunately, like all that wisdom that you have as a grandparent is going to go to the wayside because like, they're not going to think you care about them as a human being. They're going to look at you as a person who's always coming down. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's like definitely come in soft, try to redirect and just come from a place of, hey, you just don't know. Like, so let me just try to teach you. Let me try to show you some things. Let me pull you aside.
Amazing. Thanks, Keelan. Okay, we have one more question, which I would love for both of you to answer. And this is from Ethan. And the question is, how do you overcome the resistance to have great leadership in our community or workplace? Which is such a good question given today's sort of discussion.
Keelan?
You said how do you overcome the resistance?
Mm-hmm.
Like resistance, I'm sorry, like you mean like?
Basically this idea of why is it so hard to have great leadership when we're seeing the conversation earlier?
Got you. Yeah, I think about this. I really just think like the short answer to me is people want to cheat the process, like there's no shortcuts to success. There's no shortcuts to great leadership. I say like my journey as a leader started, when I was 11 years old and, my dad had me after Rhythm and Booms in Madison during the 4th of July, fireworks show. The next day there'd be trash everywhere. And he like made me go out there with my siblings to clean it up. Right. Like that was kind of like the start of my journey, and here I am at 36, just really now coming into my own, so if you really think about it, it took 25 years, you know what I mean, to really get to the place where I'm at. And I feel like a lot of times, people want to rush the process, right? You want to cheat it. You don't want to necessarily, do the dirt work of, like being under someone's mentorship, being under someone's leadership, learning, from someone else, even if it's like, even if it's like a boss you don't like, right? Like that's one of the top things I get from like a lot of the young adults that we work with. Oh, I didn't like my boss. I don't like my teacher, as if that's an excuse to totally just jump ship and not to deal with them. And it's like, no, like this is a great opportunity for you to just stay and develop and grow. And you know what? Maybe there's things that that teacher or that boss is, doing that you don't appreciate right now, and that you won't really come to appreciate until you're a little bit older and you can look back on it and be like, hey, like when I was like 18, 19, I didn't get it. But, at 35, I totally understand where you're coming from, but like I was willing to really embrace the process. So, yeah, like I think like from my perspective, there's just too many people who want to be like a quick success, right? And this kind of plays into like this vain culture that we live in. Like everyone wants to become like the next, Instagram star or, whatever the kids are into, like, with the whole online social media stuff, TikTok and, Tinder, all that stuff. I'm not really hip on that. That's not really my world. My world's changing diapers, potty training, so kind of a little disconnected. But, like this is the old school piece of me. Like, hey, pay your dues, be patient, go through these different circumstances when it's hard, stick with it. Because ultimately, great leadership starts with inside. It starts with your heart and your character, right? And it's not a position, it's not status, it's not a title.
I think also in addition to that, if we're thinking of it in a more like hierarchical way where, there's a hierarchy of leadership, I think of how in corporate America, and I've only been in corporate America for 3 years, so I know that's not too many years of experience to speak on. But there is this culture of dictatorship when it comes to leadership. Like Keenan was saying, there's a lack of character in leadership in some of the leaders that we look up to. And we spoke about this earlier on when Keelan was addressing the parenting question, right? What they see is what they become. And so I feel as though people walk into that culture seeing leadership as that. And automatically that creates a cycle of dictatorship and leadership that isn't active and involved. Part of the reason why I love being an engineering lead is learning from my analysts. I also love the idea of giving them the opportunity to lead projects and just giving them room to grow, right? And not feeling the need that, I think we also spoke about this earlier on, the whole idea of wanting to get the credit for yourself. For me, and maybe it's because corporate America is not the end game for me, I feel the most successful when my analysts feel empowered and when they feel appreciated. And so that's what my leadership style is. And however I shape activity and in however I shape a request for responsibility or request for action, it comes from a place of, I want you to feel empowered. I want you to know that you're appreciated. So much so that I joke about how they're probably tired of hearing me saying thank you and how awesome they are all the time. But I've realized how consequent to that, there's never resistance on their end when I need any support from them, but also because they know that even though some of them are in India and Tel Aviv and wherever else, I don't mind waking up in the middle of the night to help them figure it out. And so I think for me, it's the definition of leadership and how we approach leadership in these different spaces and organizations.
Whew. Wow. Wow. I know you guys are focused on talking to camera, but you should see the things that are coming through the chats and the messages are not stopping. This was so inspiring. I feel like I kept saying, if you need a shot of inspiration, come to this. And I feel like I totally delivered. I didn't deliver. You guys delivered. Many, many, many thanks. I just want to ask you two if you have any final thoughts before we say goodbye.
I'm just excited to have been here. I have grown a lot. I'm actually excited to go back and watch this because I feel like because you're in conversation, there are a few nuggets that you're missing out. So I know that there are nuggets from Keelan and Simon that I want to go back and revisit. I'm big on having sticky notes and pasting them everywhere. So I'm excited to see how many sticky notes are going to become of this conversation. But again, thank you for having us. This has really been fun. It's been exciting and again, very inspirational.
Yeah, I appreciate you being on the panel, Simon and Veronica. Thanks Christiana and the DoGoodery team for putting this on. I think, to everyone out there, I think the only thing I would like to say, one is thank you for being on a Zoom call for 90 minutes. I definitely can struggle with being on Zoom calls all day. So I appreciate, you guys giving the time. And I think my little last bit of, I guess, encouragement, is don't underestimate, yourselves, right? Especially, I know there's a lot of ULIEA people out there, a lot of, sort of social impact organization practitioners out there. And, I obviously, I'm on the front lines with you guys, so today I may be on this panel, but, as soon as I get off this panel, it's back to the daily grind. And, I think that a lot of times, we can feel a little unappreciated. It can feel like we're kind of working in a vacuum and, are we really, making progress and sort of just treading water? But, it really is taking that day by day step. And, and I think the fact that, many of you guys have committed yourself to this path and this journey, we really are, the future. We really are, our species' best hope, if you will. And we shouldn't forget that, right? So, I just want to encourage you guys. I appreciate all the work that everyone's doing out there. And don't be discouraged. All you guys are amazing. And every little thing that you're doing is making a difference.
Amazing. To our audience, thank you so much for hanging tight with us. Most of you stayed on for the entire time and it's incredible. We will be following up with a video. Give us about a week, but we will be we'll send this to everybody who registered for this, and we'll also be making it public through DoGoodery Social. We wish you all an incredible holiday season. Stay safe, stay home, and stay good. All right, everybody. Thank you. Have a nice day. See you soon. Bye.